So, good evening. Tonight I picked the topic up looking further into purchasing properties almost anywhere in the world and the issues in terms of legality of using the property. Um, Virtually every country, every county, every state, county, city has a zoning law no matter where you move or where you want to purchase land. There are certain countries prohibiting citizens of other countries to purchase any property outright, and you have to go through certain steps and to be able to acquire the property. Then there is the differences in the types of property, whether it's a plain agricultural land use. They usually come with a land use permit, as it is called in legal terms. Then you have in the zoning laws, residential zones, mixed zones, industrial zones, light industrial zones, and that sort of stuff. And then, then there is properties which are a combination of agricultural with residential, both of it integrated on one property, basically. And that is pretty much true for any place on this planet. This whole thing with zoning and the taxation of the properties, that should be the topic here tonight. I'm not going to make this a real big legal thing, where we're going to talk about details and paragraphs and this and that and the other thing is. I want to give you some ideas if you have never bought a property and you may have only limited knowledge of the process of buying a property in your country. The European countries, for the better parts, all originated out of the Roman Empire, and then through the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Catholic Church, or the Greek Orthodox Church, had adopted over the centuries and millennials similar zoning structures. And what you're looking at today is basically the result out of this, which has evolved over centuries and millennials, basically. Millenniums. The United States is no difference. And I can give you about 3 different examples here of zoning issues I had in the United States when I bought property here. And we can, translate this into Bulgaria. We can translate this into Portugal, Spain, Italy, any other country. And I think I want to keep it in terms where it is easily understandable in everyday language, without any legal limbo where you have to get the dictionary out to, look this stuff up. In general, let me see. We refer to 2 types of properties. There is the ones where you own the land outright. That is usually referred to as fee simple, because you're paying it once and you own the property, you get the deed, the title to the property, and that's it. And then you're subject to taxation on those properties by the local governments. Usually in some countries it's the state or even the federal, level, which collects those taxes for the property annually, semi-annually, and that sort of stuff. The other form of property is what we call a leasehold. That means you're paying, usually it's government-owned land or regulated, and then usually for the better part of this, owned by the government, and you basically are renting the land from the government for an X amount of years. Usually that is done 50 years or 99 years is the 2 most common length of lease contracts you're signing. And that has to be paid annually Sometimes it includes the taxes, sometimes it doesn't. It all depends on the locality. You can build on this, you own the house, and if the lease expires, then the question is if they're going to renew it and at what cost. So there is some uncertainty involved in it, especially when the leasehold gets towards the end of the lease, say like the last 5 years on a 50-year leasehold or 10 years on a 99-year leasehold. That's when it becomes uncertain, and you're trying to get this already resolved at that point. Usually the original owner or leaseholder of that property is probably deceased by that time, especially 99 years. That means the heirs of the estate basically will have to deal with this, because leasehold can be passed on to heirs. It is willable. It's a willable form of property. So the most properties which people or YouTube viewers are probably interested in is probably everything under about 50,000 euros or $50,000, since it is more or less the same amount of money. A little bit more, a little bit less makes no difference here. And most of those properties are located in rural communities out in the countryside for the better part. And most of them have been abandoned. Most of them come with a X amount of square meter or acreage of land. Most of it is in Portugal or in Bulgaria. It is fee simple, what we would call that. So it can be owned outright depending upon the citizen status of the purchaser. They may have to set up a company in that country to purchase it, and then the company will hold the deed to the property. But it is essentially the same thing, so it really doesn't make a big difference in that sense. Any type of these type of combined land uses entail a partial agricultural use and a residential use. So in Bulgaria, for instance, these homes, they like with an average of 2,000 square meters with a existing house on it, which has already, some form of a bathroom and kitchen in it, is clearly established, and there's probably not much in terms of building permits you have to acquire from the city to do any work on it. Some communities, they probably, because it is really a communal affair and it is regulated by the city or county offices, the elected county boards, city board members, and the mayor, they usually decide on how these processes are set up. So if you find a property in a particular town, that is the same in Portugal too, or in Spain, or any place you go to, you probably want to get yourself acquainted with the process to obtaining possibly building permits. And usually when it involves electricity, water, and sewage, that's the three areas where you definitely most likely have to get building permits. Some cities, they don't require it. If you put like a sewer system, you want to put a cesspool in there, or you want to get off-grid and you disconnect from the electric grid, from the public utility grid, then there may be restrictions there. I owned a property here in Tennessee for quite a few years. It was 25 acres, I believe. That is about 13,000 square meters in a rural area on the Tennessee River. And there, the zoning laws were that you needed a building permit only if you were or intended to hook up your building you're trying to build or were building to the utility grid, to the public utility grid. If you had no intentions of doing so, the building codes and any particular applications for building permits did not apply. So that, like I said, that varies with every community in every part where you are. And that can vary from one lot to the next lot to the next lot. So you have to really look specifically and inquire with the city or with the county of what that particular parcel of land or multiple parcels of land, of how that is regulated, of what they want with building permits and whatnot, what have you. And this way you won't run into any issues. Of course, the adventure in this is obtaining a property, which may not even have a building, which is zoned as agricultural use. And that is a completely different ballgame. Once you branch out and you find a property which was used primarily for agricultural use, that means either for animal, for cows, pigs, sheep, goats, whatever the case might be, to basically corral them on there and to feed them there and then have them out there. It's usually straightforward land use only. And in most countries, they have a land use permit. That means you have to go to the city or to the county in these cases, most likely, because these agricultural sites are usually in the county area rather than in a city area, in the city limits. And in those properties, you will have to obtain what they call a land use permit. That means you're telling the government, or you're asking the government for permission, for instance, to grow corn and wheat or something like this, or whatever you may want to grow on it. Or you want to herd a cattle of a group of 20 cows, your cattle's on there, cattle feed lot, basically grass area and that sort of stuff. And the city or the county in that case is going to look at the water rights and how much water this is going to take, where the water is going to come from, and how this is going to be allocated. And most likely you're going to get a particular permit for this particular use. Usually they issue this with agricultural stuff like corn and wheat and soya beans and stuff like this en bloc. So you can do 1 year this and then the next year potatoes, and just as an example. So they give you the guidelines there. That depends too from county to county, and every part of this world is different. What you can grow on there and how that is done, you have sometimes more freedom, sometimes less freedom. On your own lot, usually when it is the combined residential agricultural use, there you can probably, split up some acreage or, some area to grow some potatoes, and you can grow some wheat if you wanted to grow wheat. And wheat as in wheat, not in weed as what you smoke, but to eat. And it may have a garden there, for vegetables and beans and tomatoes and onions and that sort of stuff. That is usually a permissible use on those properties. Some of these agricultural plots or lands have already a barn type on them because they were used for animal feed, for animal grazing, basically. Mostly that's what that is. And these barn type buildings are considered agricultural buildings, and they're usually not permissible to be converted to houses. You would have to go through a very lengthy process to have agricultural land converted to residential use or for residential use, because usually that requires the city or the county to approve this, and then you have to basically develop the land for this. That means roads, sewage, electricity, all of this stuff would have to be, you have to set this all up yourself. And depending if you want to split the agricultural land up into multiple parcels, into smaller parcels and sell them off, for instance, to recuperate your money, then you're becoming basically a developer. So you have to go into that phase of where this is going, the conversion phase from agricultural to residential, which is a drawn-out process, requires building permits. You will have to tell them where the water is going to come from and what you're going to do with the streets and lighting for the streets and all of this happy horseshit. Basically, that's something bigger. But if you just want to buy, say, like 5,000 square meter lot, 10,000 square meter lot, which is solely agricultural, and you do not have animals, which would graze on there, whatever animals they might be, you will not be able, from my experience with this stuff, to easily get a permit, a building permit to erect a permanent structure on that property. Unless, like I said, as you're going through it. The other problem in many, many rural areas is fire, the dry months in the summer, and the fire hazard created by human beings being out in the field. The fire hazard during the summer months is already, or during the dry months, is already pretty elevated, and just lightning and thunder can set something on fire, where they're going to have a hard time, especially if it is a mountainous region, to extinguish these fires, these wildfires, when they break out. So this is one thing you definitely want to have in mind. So Bulgaria, in a lot of ways, is easier to buy the land because the lots are already zoned basically for this, since they had that dual use of the land between some agricultural allocation for the garden and possibly potatoes and that sort of stuff, and fruit trees and that kind of thing. And then on the other hand is you have the agricultural support buildings there with barns, and you have a house to live in. So these properties are more suitable because they're already designated for this, because otherwise they wouldn't be there, rather than trying to branch out and buy a piece of land where there is no structure on there other than an agricultural support structure. That is the official term. In other words, a barn. The only people which used to be permitted to actually camp on these type of properties were sheep and goat herders. Cows, cattle are usually left out by themselves. You just go up there periodically and just inspect them. And otherwise, if you feed them extra dry food, then you bring that up there once a day and you check everyone out and you make sure they have enough water. Sheep and goats, they need more care than cattle and pigs. So they usually allow the sheep herder, the shepherd, with his dog to stay there during the time the flock is basically grazing on that lot until they move on. That is the classical example of a permitted use of this. And I do not know how this is in Portugal and Spain. I know that the areas for this kind of activity, sheep herding and goat herding, is very limited, and it is confined to the regions where there is no or very little possibility of wildfires during that dry season, basically. In Portugal, it may be a little bit different. You would have to check with the local people. So if you have a van, a camper, a mobile home, a caravan, any of those things, and you think you can, or tent, and you think you're going to buy a agricultural lot, which has just agricultural use to begin with, they may not let you stay there for any prolonged period of time with this kind of vehicle or structure. That is something you have to check with the city and with the county, wherever you're thinking on buying this. In general, my recommendation would be, if you are not a farmer already, I would not purchase any agricultural land. That means any lot, any parcel of land which does not have a house on it which was used for residential purposes. That means they have either already a bathroom in there with a toilet or an outhouse, at a bare minimum, in some form of a fireplace for a kitchen. If the building doesn't have either one of these two things, then it probably has never been used as a residential building, because that's the two necessities you need. A shower or bath or whatever, that's a different story. They used to use a zinc tub, the same when they did the laundry, and they would stand in there when they were, not as wealthy or poor, and they would heat up the water on the stove, or the wood-burning stove, and then pour it in there, and they would wash themselves down standing in a zinc tub in the kitchen, basically. That served as a bathroom. That was the common way people took or cleansed themselves back until the running water was actually installed in buildings starting around probably 1875, 1880, until some buildings 1950, until they had running water. So you can see this. So if they don't have a kitchen with a fireplace, some form of a cooking fireplace stove, and a outhouse, at least an outhouse, then you know this has never been used for residential purposes, and you probably should not even consider buying that. It may look nice, it may have a great scenic view, and it might be absolute heaven, and you won't be disturbed with anything, but the chances of you getting a building permit to build a house on the structure is probably not going to happen. The other thing is, what you also have to consider is the roadways to these properties, which are, if you're lucky, are going to be gravel roads going up there, if it is not just a track basically going up there. And unless you have a four-wheel drive, a suitable all-terrain vehicle, short of a tractor basically, you may not be able to get there during the rain season, because everything is going to be soaked and muddy, or in the winter it is frozen and you won't be able to get there in the first place. These are all things you have to think about, this, especially if this is mountainous, hilly terrain when you're looking at these things. The other issue is usually livestock, chickens, ducks, geese, all of that stuff. In some rural areas, they are permitted. Some rural areas, they will give you a limit. Say like one rooster and 5 hens or something like this. Maybe 4 or 5 ducks, because of the noise and the contamination which comes from those animals. Especially rabbits are usually, regulated too, on how many rabbits you can have in a rabbit cage and that sort of stuff. And with these things, if you've never owned this before, in these rural areas, you're going to have all sorts of other wildlife out there who's going to be very interested at night coming into your property and feasting on your livestock. So sometimes you have to have a shotgun standing next to your bed to basically defend your livestock in these kind of situations. So it is very different than city life. The other thing is, besides zoning, is when you're young. God, I remember my youth. I had no illness, no sickness, no nothing. I didn't know what a doctor was. I didn't have to see a doctor. I didn't need any medication. And I was just happy. And that started to change in my late 40s. Now I need to see the doctor. I need to take medications and stuff like this. Just comes with aging. So when you move to these places, you have to look and think forward ahead of time. Now you're in your youth. The youth is the most interesting time of our lives, and you can do a lot of stuff which will get very difficult or nearly impossible to do when you're older or old, either one of the two. Medical care is one of them. And so if you have to travel, far away to see a doctor, and you're starting to get ailments, chronic type ailments, whether it's rheumatic, things with your bones or whatever, blood pressure issues and diabetes and that sort of stuff. These things, they come to a more or less a degree. You need eye care, eyeglasses, hearing aids and stuff like this. You may sound like, my God, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm young and vital. Believe me, I was young too. We all were young at one point, and I had a great youth. My time from being 18 until I was 47, 48 was great. And now the last 10 years, I can feel things, I can, when I do stuff, when I build things, it hurts. I get aches and pains here and this, that, and the other thing. I don't want to cry you a river. But this is these things you want to take into consideration. So in a house, when you remodel a house, most remodeling work will last, depending on the quality of the materials used, 10, 15, 20 years. At that point, you have to replace things, and you need to have an income at that time, one way, form, shape, or other, to keep your house maintained, because otherwise your house is going to look like it in 30 or 40 years the way it looks like it right now, while you're buying it, the house you're trying to buy it, and then some other young person will come and will be happy that they're going to get a cheap property, and you put all that money in there and you get no return on your investment. I hope this has given you some idea on how this works. One last word is, let's just say you have built the house, or you refurbished, reconstructed it, remodeled it, whatever you want to say, call it, and you managed to maybe turn a barn into a guest house, for instance. If you got a building permit to turn one of the barns into a guest house, and now you have the idea, oh, this is a great spot, and I probably could rent out the guest house. We have given it a separate entrance so no one can see it. That is going to open up another can of worms, because now you're getting into a commercial aspect of this. That also can be true for home-based businesses in any way, form, or shape, even when you do something online like YouTube. YouTube would be considered a home-based business, and that may or may not be permissible in that city or county you're in, so you have to check for that too. Renting a place out, say like for tourism purposes, usually excites the city council, the county officials, because it brings in visitors, which leave money in the community because they're going to buy stuff. But you may be in a zone where they have to change the zone on your property to accommodate that type of commercial activity. That is something which may require not just a permit, but the city council or the county council to actually change the zoning on your particular property. And that is something you will have to probably retain legal advice, a lawyer, solicitor, to get more information on that, if that is your plans of what that is going to take. That is not going to be easily permissible. Now, if your parents or your grandparents come to visit for a week, which is considered, first-degree family, that's usually a different story. But if that goes into a commercial activity where you're starting to rent out that repurposed barn, basically, as a guest house, and you have multiple different visitors arriving and leaving there, departing there for weeks or days on end, during the season, then that is probably not going to fly until the legal framework has been established. Now, I hope that this video was of interest to you. Just as a disclaimer, as a legal disclaimer, to state that this is not legal advice I have dispensed here or I am dispensing. And in any case, you need to check with your local community where you're trying to purchase the property at, and you probably want to retain or seek the professional advice of a licensed attorney in that community who can further assist you and clarify any questions you have. And with that, you have a great evening.